Hello and welcome to the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe, though apparently I'm Dave.
And I'm Joe,
also Dave.
so I might be Dave.
And I'm Philip. Oh no, wait, I'm Luke.
No, you're Joe, apparently.
Yeah. I should have checked that before we went live, eh?
Why would we ever get anything technically correct to begin with? It wouldn't be us. God damn it.
I'm sorry. I can't be bothered to write Bearded Heretic right now. I'm writing Luke.
Okay, that's fine.
So hello and welcome to the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show. Tonight we are stepping slightly away from philosophy into the realms of psychology, and we're going to be discussing mental illness, and of course we need him here for that.
Yeah. So yeah, do you want me to start? Sorry.
You sounded like you were going to say something, but it's okay.
So that's my first technical difficulty of the night in my brain.
That's cool. Dave, do one. You get something wrong now. So yeah, we're here to discuss mental illness, and the title might be a little bit misleading with is mental illness real? I mean, the answer to that one is yes, and we're going to tell you why. But so Luke, tell us, what is mental illness?
Well, that's the question I was going to ask you guys first, just to find out what your understanding of what mental illness is. So what do you guys think it is?
Dave?
Damn it, why me?
Well, we need him to get something wrong first, so, you know.
True.
Just basically any kind of problems with cognitive function that kind of swerve from the standard and might impact on your life in a negative way.
Okay.
Or cause you problems with day-to-day function, or that kind of thing.
Yeah, Joe, what are your thoughts?
I'd go along sort of the same lines in the sense that it's an issue in the brain, obviously, that can cause emotional distress in certain ways, or I suppose you could actually have a mental illness that went the other way and made you feel positive all the time, but resulted in negative effects as well. But essentially, it's a dysfunction in the brain that affects your everyday life.
Yeah, so those are really good. Those are really good explanations of what mental illness is. So it's that kind of like dysfunction. Usually, it's around the disorder is around like kind of our day-to-day living. Yeah, so and I think it's really important to, when we're discussing mental illness, to discuss what mental illness isn't, right? because so many people kind of talk about mental illness, and they talk about it as if like it's some like a phrase I like to use is pathologize normal behavior. So, for instance, right, you're about to go on stage and give a speech in front of 100,000 people. And you get really nervous, and you're like, I don't really want to step on that stage. I don't want to do it. Right? Is that mental illness?
No, it's a natural reaction.
Not necessarily. No. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. But there will be people who say, that's anxiety, or that's, like, oh, I have anxiety because these extreme situations that we get put into, we feel anxious in.
There's a difference between feeling anxious and suffering with an anxiety disorder. Just in the same way as there's a difference between feeling depressed and suffering with depression. There's plenty of things that we can experience without it actually being a persistent disorder.
Precisely, yeah. And this is where I guess the medical model of mental health comes in, right? So the medical model treats our mental health like we would treat physical health. So, you have like chronic illnesses, you have like acute illnesses, you have these things that kind of like affect us. And depending on the level of effect, depends on whether it's a disability or whether it's just like you need a short kind of like period of treatment or something like that. So it looks at it that way rather than it thinking about it in terms of like some other ideas are like, you know, that it's like negative energy and stuff like that, you know. So it's very much medically based. So, you know, if you have let's use schizophrenia, for example, which is a psychotic mental illness that has these positive and negative symptoms. Positive symptoms being hallucinations and delusions, and then negative symptoms being more like depressive symptoms. That can be treated because it's a medical issue, you know. So you can treat it with medication or therapies, stuff like that. So that's what the medical model of mental health is. You know, that these things are treatable and that they're things that are wrong with us. You know, that we're not meant to be like that because we're not meant to have a broken leg, right? We're not meant to have diabetes. You know, it's not conducive to living healthily, right? So that's the idea, is that schizophrenia is something that we're not meant to be. So we can treat it in various ways.
So, along with things being attributed incorrectly, you know, individual experiences, you quite often hear people say so-and-so's mentally ill because of their belief or because of their lack of belief in something. Mm-hmm. And, you know, whether you're religious or not, neither side of that is mental ill. You can have religious people who are mentally ill, and you can have atheists who are, and non-religious people who are mentally ill as well. So it's kind of weird when we hear people say things like, oh, you know, belief in God is a mental illness, it's a delusion, or atheism is a mental illness. It doesn't seem to make much sense. I mean, how could anyone actually classify it that way?
Well, so what I think this happens quite a lot with people who are saying like somebody believing in a God is a delusion or a hallucination because there's no God there, right? But actually what they're doing is they're looking at all the kind of like evidence that's out there for God. So, you know, the ones that you guys have talked about before, you know, contingency, they're looking at, you know, fine-tuning or personal experiences of like, you know, things happening to them and stuff. And people are saying because there's like this imaginary element to it, it must be a delusion. And what I would say to that is that those people don't understand what delusions are or hallucinations. And the other thing is, like, you know, like we all have irrational beliefs. Every single one of us has irrational beliefs, you know. I have an irrational fear of mushrooms. I have a phobia of mushrooms, right? I can't stand them. They make me feel sick and they freak me out and I get very nervous when I'm around them. It's really odd, right? But like that, like irrational beliefs are not mental illness, providing that they don't affect your day-to-day living, right? So if you can function in a day-to-day way, you know, and you can hold these irrational beliefs, or even if they're like rationalized, you know, then it's not mental illness, you know.
And you tend to find most people can function in society regardless of their particular religious beliefs or lack of them. So in that regard, yeah, it just doesn't fit the parameters.
No. And like, so let's think about what hallucination is. Yeah, so hallucination is a perceived experience that didn't happen, right?
Yeah.
And usually we have to use other people to kind of say that didn't happen, right? So other people have to say, well, I can't see that person, or I can't hear that voice, or I can't smell that. Yeah. So, but like, God isn't necessarily about like hearing a voice saying do this or do that. It's about how you feel as an individual. It's about your conscience. It's about your, you know, the kind of like emotions that you feel, like an emotional buildup. It's not about those kind of like those sensory inputs. It's more about how you feel and your emotions and stuff. And that to me that's not a hallucination.
No. I suppose you can make yourself hallucinate, though. There are certain practices, religious or not, but you often see people in the group environment feeling a certain way, and feeling that sort of euphoria side of things, and some people can hallucinate off of the back of the euphoria. But again, even then, doesn't necessarily qualify as mental illness, because it's not stopping them from doing anything in the rest of their life. It just can make them feel validated in their faith.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
And
Other things that meant. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say. I mean, to be honest, there are times when I've meditated and it's put me in a euphoric state. No, I didn't fall about and talk in tongues, but then not everybody who does get into that euphoric state does. There have been other times where I've fallen about talking in tongues. So, I mean, even then, so I've had a similar experience, but obviously, because it's not attached to religion, it wouldn't be thought of that way by some of our online counterparts. Is there a good way that you could explain to someone who says things like religion is a mental illness, theism is a mental illness, regardless of whether you feel that there is harm done by religion, and certain religion and certain practices, definitely I would agree there are harmful practices and harmful beliefs out there, but in a generalistic way, we wouldn't actually say it's a mental illness, although some people do. So how could you say to them, just quite concisely, how it really isn't?
I would say that they are usually genuinely held beliefs that somebody has considered and decided are true in reality.
Yep, fair.
And the other thing I would say about that whole thing is that it actually stigmatizes mental illness, because what you're doing is you're painting a portrait of mental illness as this like really kind of negative thing that's a bit like childish to a certain extent, and is like, makes you believe in like completely crazy things, and you're like, oh, these people are crazy, and you're actually stigmatizing mental illness by saying like, normal behavior, which you don't agree with.
What is the percentage of people that suffer with mental illness at least at some point in their life?
Well, so they say that it's 1 in 4 adults. Okay. I think that statistic is massively underrepresented. I think a lot of people go through situations of mental illness and never report it, because those statistics are obviously self-reported statistics. So I would say it's probably 1 in 2 or 1 in 1. Personally.
So basically, this is something that reported a quarter of the population will say they have, and
yeah.
I think I'd have to agree with you from experiences of talking to people about things, even if it was, they didn't have something that impacted their entire life. People have suffered with mental illness for a time, and through therapy and the like have been able to cope with it better, and they say, I'm no longer suffering with it. I'd say at least half of us, if not more, have suffered at some point in our life. So therefore, by stigmatizing mental illness, we're doing harm to not just
everyone.
We're doing it to everyone.
Yeah.
I think as well, with the whole religion is a mental illness thing, it sort of pushes that narrative that all you've got to do is stop believing some daft thing and you're cured of your mental illness.
Exactly.
Like, the go out for a long walk if you're feeling depressed sort of narrative.
Yeah, there's one thing I know, right? And that's that if you come into contact with somebody who has schizophrenia and you say to them, MI5 aren't out to get you, that will not cure their schizophrenia. Right?
No.
Right?
Are
so
you
why
MI5?
is that going to work? So if you think that people who believe in God are crazy and have like some sort of psychotic thing, and then you're saying, look how stupid you are, even if you think that they have a mental illness, you're getting it wrong by approaching it in that way. So these people, that they don't genuinely mean it. What they're meaning to say is that this person's crazy as an insult, right? And that's why it's stigmatizing. of mental illness, because anytime someone says, "Oh, when they mean it maliciously, that you're crazy," then to me that's they're contributing to the issues that people with mental illness face in society, and in coming out and being honest about their experiences.
Yeah, I'd agree.
It also means that
sorry, go for it, Dave.
the ones that are mocking them, and saying that they're worthy of ridicule are basically saying, well, I think you're mentally ill, and I think the mentally ill are worthy of ridicule.
Yeah, and do any of you really want to be that sort of person?
The person that ridicules the mentally ill, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. It's.
I mean, maybe
makes
they
me really
do,
sad.
Well, I mean, maybe they do. From the number of people that we've spoken to that actually say that they think theists are deserving of ridicule, and they also say things like theism is a mental illness. Maybe they do. I mean, it's horrible. It seems like terrible bullying to me, but yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, just reading from Philip. Is probably joking. He says, the best thing you can say is, I know exactly what you're going through. It's just a phase. Have you tried exercising? No, I do think, right, as part of a routine, I think exercise can actually help someone in certain regards, but I don't think it's the be all and end all. If you think simple exercise is going to cure a mental illness, man, maybe you're mentally ill. Yeah.
Although saying that, there are three things that do really help, especially with like anxiety and depression, which are
Wanking.
Well, yeah, that's one. Four things. The first one is exercise. It doesn't have to be really like complex and stuff. Second one is diet, and then the third one is sleep. Because when you become depressed or anxious or something, you neglect these areas, and then you become more fatigued, and that increases your anxiety and increases your depression, which then puts you into a more fatigued state, which then increases it. So you end up in this like cycle. And one really good way of getting out of that is getting a routine where you're eating, even if you don't feel like you want to eat, you kind of just make sure you're planning your meals or like prepping meals all in one go and stuff, and just eating regularly, at regular intervals with nutritious meals. Doing a little bit of exercise just can be like a walk, and making sure that your sleep hygiene is really good. So going to sleep at regular times, waking up at the same times and stuff. Those three they won't cure it, but they'll help it a lot. So there is some fact in that statement. Although just try. Have you tried exercising? I'm not sure that's the best way to put it.
Yeah, or the people who go, oh yeah, just buy a pair of running shoes and go running every day. Like, really? That's kind of heartless. Yes, it can help. It can help. I don't think anyone is arguing the fact that it can be beneficial. But it's, as I said, it's not the be all and end all of it. I think we actually do benefit from routine, or at least a lot of us do. So not just the regular meals and say like the regular bedtimes, but regular things that happen throughout your day or throughout your week. It's nice to maybe not have a planned weekend, but have a planned Monday to Friday. Which obviously, if you've got a regular job, most people do with that sort of get up, go to work and all that sort of thing. But there are some people who aren't in that sort of pattern. I actually found when I was working as a chef, or in fact any shift work that I've ever done, it was a lot harder to keep a consistent frame of mind, because you'd be this shift here, that shift there, waking up early, going to bed late, and then thrown around all over the place, and it really does throw you off.
That was the same when I worked on the ironically, the mental health ward. Like, because I'd have maybe 9 days on, and then like 4 or 5 days off, and then I'd have 2 days on, and then 6 days on, and then like it was like, and then it was like either 6 till 2. So I'd get back and then I'd nap until 6 o'clock again. So I'd nap for like 4 hours because I was so tired, and then wake up and that's my evening done. Yeah. Or it was like 1 until like 9. So I'd wake up late, obviously, and then just like, and it just completely like my whole body clock. Or I'd do a night shift, and they are killer. Night shifts are the worst. I do not recommend them to anybody. So yeah, and like that was probably, my mental health was probably like at the lowest towards the end of like my time at the ward because of that, just that system. Like it's just awful. So
it must have been quite trying being in the wards as well.
It was. I think it's something you get used to quite quickly. You
become dead to everything.
No, do you know what? Like, it's just curiosity. But honestly, the amount of Jesuses I met, you see patterns in behavior, and then you start to recognize it. It's just like, it's when it becomes quite extreme that it's like quite difficult. Because obviously, some you see people at their worst, and then you're expecting them to not be embarrassed about it, and once they kind of come around a little bit after taking medication and stuff. And you're trying to like be like, this is fine. Oh no, my camera. Don't worry, it'll come back on. Okay, I'm back. And yeah, so you're just trying to like build a relationship with that person when they might have been kind of like trying to punch you like the previous night. So it's like, yeah, it's a bit weird.
What was the most interesting person that you've ever met in those regard, the most interesting case ever?
Okay. There's been a couple. So the first one is somebody I met who had dissociative identity disorder, which is like multiple personality disorder. Yeah. That was really interesting because he had like 3 or 4 personalities, but they weren't so dissimilar because the way that dissociative identity disorder works is that it's almost like a fractured personality. So it's not that there's 2; it's that they're like, so like if you like punched a mirror and you had all these shards, like that's how it is. So you have this whole thing, and then it gets fractured in some way, and then you have these like different aspects of the person. Yeah. So
is it like sort of bits, certain parts of the personality are more enhanced? So this one might be a little bit more aggressive, and this one might be a little bit more emotional in other ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And normally, so it's a little bit more complex than the mirror example, because normally like a second personality or third personality would be a defensive personality. So they'd come in to kind of fill in the gaps of somebody's like own personality if they need defending in some way. So they might be more assertive or more aggressive, like you say, in order to defend that individual in that certain situation. So it seems like it's a defense mechanism brought out of like really extreme trauma. This guy had these personalities, and they were quite similar. And one of his personalities was very good at acting like the other one. so he'd trick us. He'd trick us into like he'd be able to just like leave the ward even though he's like detained, because he'd be like, oh yeah, I'm just going to go for my leave or whatever, and then we'd give him his leave, and then he'd run off, and then we'd have to call the police and stuff. But yeah, he was very interesting. I think he's dead now. Oh. So but he was one of Fred West's children, the serial killer, Fred and Rose West. So yeah, he was very interesting, but very troubled person. Obviously, all the stuff that he went through when he was a child. Yeah. So yeah, he was very interesting.
Do any of the personalities ever have like completely different accents or anything like that, or speak a different language?
No, I think his was quite a mild version of it, because sometimes his His main other personality was quite childish. But he didn't have like a baby voice or anything like that. He just acted like a kid, basically.
Because of his messed up childhood, he had a personality that was regaining that childhood, I guess.
Yeah. So, yes, he was a troubled man.
Expert diagnosis.
You should be a psychiatrist. Who else? There was a guy that was completely psychotic. Had schizophrenia, believed that he was Jesus, but also that aliens were coming and that he could communicate with them telepathically to their ship, which was like hovering invisible above the hospital. And he would go outside and he'd like start nodding and like close his eyes, and he'd be like, I'm talking to them. And then he'd point at something that would happen, like there'd be like a leaf that would blow past or something, and he'd say, look, they did that to show me a sign that they were there. Very psychotic man. It's very interesting. There was a woman who had drug-induced psychosis from a Buddhist retreat where they had spiked all of the people who had gone to its food with LSD, and she had a bad reaction to it and had a psychotic episode for a month and a half.
Oh, blimey!
Some of the worst psychosis I've ever seen. She was completely just like not in the world that we're in. And then she came round after like a lot of medication, and it's doing really well now. I think I saw her in London a couple of years ago after I moved here, and just randomly bumped into her in central London, and she I think she was a bit kind of like in that kind of like I remember having a good relationship with you on the ward, but this is a bit embarrassing because you've seen me in a weird place. Like, so we had a brief talk, but I didn't kind of like push it. But she's at uni and stuff, so she's doing really well.
Oh, that's good. You probably remind her about a part of her life that she'd rather forget as well. So it's probably quite painful seeing you.
Even though and I was just handing out flyers, like, for extra money. Like, that's by South Bank Centre. I was just handing out flyers. I was like, this is a really weird, like, meeting. Like, so yeah, lots of interesting people.
Yeah, I can imagine. There's actually, I don't know if you have experienced anyone like this, but there was a guy who, in one of the places I used to, in fact, my first chefing job was, I was a pizza chef. And there was a guy that used to come in regularly, and he'd had a metal plate put in his head. And ever since he's put it in, he'd hear voices, and he'd come into the restaurant on his own, and he would be there talking away to himself. And he would, he'd actually talk to people about it. And he's just saying, he knows that he's not really talking to people, but he can hear them, and he feels compelled to talk back. And so he spent a lot of time on his own, because his own company was enough, I guess. And he'd come in and he'd order himself pizza, and he'd have this full-blown conversation, and then you'd sort of come up and you'd serve him, and it was, but he was completely able to function.
Do you know why he had the metal plate put in?
I don't know. I think you get it at I don't know.
Are you certain that he had a metal plate put in?
No, I have no evidence of that whatsoever. I've only got his word for it.
I would say he doesn't have a metal plate in his head, and he's just psychotic.
Maybe.
That's what. Because I don't know how a metal plate would turn someone in, like to have voices, but I can imagine someone who is schizophrenic believing that they haven't.
Well, unless he had a bump to the head, which caused him, and then
maybe the head injury caused it. Yeah,
it wasn't actually the metal plate, but
that would be an interesting, because the amount of people that have come in and like been like, oh yeah, like I have this chip, I have this this Wi-Fi signal, I can connect with my television. Yeah, lots of that. So
brilliant.
So do you guys know the difference between neurosis and psychosis? They're both forms of mental illness.
Probably not now, if I'm honest.
You know the words though, yeah?
Yeah.
So what do we mean? If someone's acting neurotic, what do we normally mean? I'm testing you now. I'm having fun.
I'd say when someone's being neurotic, they're sort of being over the top, acting. So they're not necessarily crazy. They're just almost like this thing has to be done. Yeah, and then I need this, and I can't think of the words. They're feeling stressed and anxious and all of those sort of things to it. But it's not the same in the way that psychosis would be a bit of a more of a mental break in that regard.
So what's psychosis?
Dave, go on.
I don't know. I thought it was something like a slight break from reality where you're hyper-focused on thoughts that aren't necessarily replications of the world. They're sort of deformed perceptions of the world. And you're acting kind of on impulse and that kind of thing.
Hey,
but like I say, I don't know.
Very close. So the key difference between neurosis and psychosis is one is a detachment from reality. So psychosis is specifically a detachment from reality. So somebody who's mentally ill and has like a neurotic mental illness would be someone who's depressed or anxious, or somebody with quite extreme ADHD, or somebody with OCD or any anxiety disorder. Those are neurotic disorders because you're kind of aware that there's something wrong there. You know, you're not actually detached from reality. If someone said, "Why are you afraid of mushrooms, Luke?" I'd be like, "Well, that's irrational." Yeah, I just am. I'm not detached from reality about it. I don't imagine that they're like, you know, some like I haven't been attacked by mushrooms or anything like that. You know, in an hallucination or whatever. So that's what a neurosis is, and I think this is another key thing where definitions in colloquial usage is problematic, because neurotic in colloquial usage tends to mean like like someone who is a bit kind of like unhinged, all these like celebrities that have had like breakdowns or whatever, then acting neurotic because they're like, which technically isn't untrue, but it depends on, like, it's more of a specific thing, and it could be depression is neurotic. And then psychotic is a detachment from reality. So you have hallucinations and delusions, and then negative psychotic symptoms, which look like depression and anxiety, but it's due to a detachment from reality rather than it being like I feel too kind of like over encumbered by the world to get out of bed. It's more of like I'm so detached from reality I can't move.
So what if you're suffering with both then? What if you're being both?
Well, you can have psychotic depression.
Yeah.
You know, so aspects of it will be detachments from reality, and then you'll also have these aspects that are kind of like due to neurosis. So like you'll be like maybe like so overcumbered by the world that you can't get out of bed, and then you have a psychosis as well, which is like a voice telling you that you're worthless and a shitty person and stuff like that. And psychosis is one of those things that is massively misunderstood. In like, how many times have we heard psychotic serial killer, or like, oh, that person's psychotic because they're acting aggressive or something like that? You know, it's like, well, one, you mean psychopathic, and two, you get that wrong as well. You know, so it's kind of one of those things where it's like, you know, psychosis is very misunderstood because it is literally just like somebody having a detachment from what is real.
So when people talk about, for example, drug-induced psychosis, that is because it's caused them to have said detachment from reality and potentially not be acting in accordance with reality, etc. Which is why they said, you know, the overuse of anything can sort of put you in that state. But if you have a form of drug-induced psychosis? Simply not doing the drugs break you out of it over time and with therapy, or do you need other drugs?
So that's a good question. So if somebody takes a hallucinogen and they're having a hallucinatory experience from the drug, that's not technically psychosis because there's a like something inducing it essentially.
Yeah.
Like there's a drug that's causing that to happen, and it should wear off, right?
Yeah.
If it doesn't wear off because of like the brain overcompensates on like dopamine levels or something like that, and it continues to, like, the brain just basically breaks in terms of like how it manufactures neurotransmitters or anything like this, then technically that's technically psychosis. And what usually needs to happen is that you need a big, like, kind of almost a similar dump of like antipsychotics in order to kind of reverse that.
Right.
That doesn't always work. So, for instance, with this girl I was talking about who went to the British Retreat, was spiked, then had a psychotic episode for a month and a half, which, you know, is a massively long time for like one dose of LSD, right? She had to have something, what was the name of it? Called Accuphase, right? And Accuphase is a very strong antipsychotic because it doubles up as a sedative, so it essentially put her to sleep for 3 days. And then when she woke up, she was less psychotic. She wasn't completely not psychotic, but her very extreme behavior, her very extreme psychotic delusions, and like she wasn't able to talk. She wasn't able to communicate at all because she just wasn't like her reactions to things were very kind of like sporadic. I have no idea what was going on in her head. She doesn't remember much of it. And yeah, so it kind of like broke down that kind of cycle. And then I think naturally her brain kind of, she had more antipsychotics, but they were like lower dosages. And it kind of like eventually kind of like seeped out. But she will always, now she's aware that drugs do that to her, she should always avoid drugs because that just happens to some people. And it can happen with any drug. It can happen with prescription drugs. It can happen with weed. It can happen with alcohol. It can happen with anything. It's not just hallucinogens. So, did that answer your question? I don't even know if that answered your question.
No, it did. Thank you.
I can't remember what the question was.
Yeah, no, definitely. A question has come in from the chat, and Frida says, why do UK doctors insist on treating acute anxiety and stress with antidepressants on the off chance that acute anxiety is caused by non-existent depression instead of using benzos?
Ooh, okay, that's a good question. I'm just reading it, and I can see that in the second part of the comment,
You want me to read that
they've
out
addressed.
now?
They've addressed. Yeah, please.
So, apart from 6 million housewives addicted to Valium, what the fuck does my 96-year-old grandmother care if she is addicted to Valium, as long as the anxiety and night terrors stop?
I mean, I think addiction is a very serious issue, and benzodiazepines are like not very pleasant drugs to be on. Well, they're pleasant for the individual, and that's the reason people get addicted, but they're also quite highly addictive. And they have side effects and stuff. I think antidepressants tend to be double up as anti-anxiety medication as well.
Like
so
SSRIs
it's not just
and stuff, wouldn't they, in general?
Sorry?
You'd use SSRIs as the...
So serotonin, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which essentially stop the brain from taking serotonin back in to reuse it and just allow it to sit there, right? So a lot of anxiety is caused by an imbalance of serotonin, which also causes depression. Because if you have too little serotonin, then your fight, flight, freeze response is more trigger happy, essentially. So what happens is that if you have more serotonin, then you're in a more pleasant kind of like space, and you're less likely to respond to something in an anxious way. That's the idea. But and whereas like something like Valium, a benzodiazepine is more just like a sedative, so it just calms you down. Yeah, so it's about what is it that is causing the issue, because it's not always the serotonin that causes anxiety, and that should really be the role of the psychiatrist, is to figure out what is the actual cause of it. Is it behavioral, or is it physiological? And then what's the best way of addressing it? Because I would argue that actually anxiety is best treated by therapy with a psychologist, because it's usually a behavioral thing that's causing anxiety, some sort of trauma or some sort of bad experience in the past that then causes you to have that anxiety response to certain stimulus.
So in regards to if the SSRIs are not working, you'd think that they should take off them in this instance. I mean, I know this is obviously not actual medical advice, but disclaimer. This is just dealing with a real hypothetical. You'd need a lot more information about the patient to actually say anything. But in the instance of SSRIs not working for the anxiety disorder, would you say a sedative would be a stopgap until therapy could be had, or should you just stop it altogether?
But that's what it should be. I the way I look at medication anyway is that medication is a band-aid, right? So if we go back to the medical model of mental illness, the medication aspect, it's not like a headache or something where you can take a paracetamol and then your headache's gone and then you can just get on with your day, right? It's more like a broken leg. Yeah. So if you have enough trauma or enough issues that cause a mental illness, it's not like to the point where you're kind of like actually going to doctors and getting it checked out, and not just like an everyday kind of like, oh, I'm feeling a bit rough today. Then there's something there that needs to be treated. And medication is one way of doing that, but are you going to treat a broken leg with Codamol? No. Are you going to treat a broken leg with morphine? No. You need to put like some effort into like rehabilitation, like some sort of like physiotherapy, and that's what psychotherapy does. Like, I think it's that psychological therapies are there for, is to actually help with the trauma, whilst the medication is there more like the morphine, which will help you kind of deal with the symptoms along that route. That's how I see it anyway. But the problem is that psychological therapies are very expensive. The government don't like expensive things, and so they kind of like cheap out on it all, and they just go, well, you know what, antidepressants seem to do the job, and then they give a bunch of people antidepressants. They're on them for 6 months. They come off of them. They feel a bit better. The actual issue hasn't been addressed, and then they feel depressed again in 6 months' time.
Yeah.
So same with anxiety. Exactly the same thing with anxiety. There's not enough effort to get to the root cause of what's causing that anxiety. Because people don't just act anxious for no reason. They don't feel anxious for no reason.
No one wants to be in that state.
Exactly.
Especially if you're talking about a generalized anxiety disorder or depression, or you don't want to be in that state. No one wants to feel bad anyway, but especially feeling it to extremes and so consistently, and it making your day-to-day life hard to live. No one wants to be afraid to answer the front door, or have any of these things go on.
Well, and this is the thing with the UK, especially. It's a reactionary system. We react to crisis. We don't do any preventative care. There's basically no preventative care within the NHS, which is problematic because if you're allowing, it would be cheaper. It'd be much cheaper to start to do some some things around understanding when you're feeling bad, some basic coping strategies, and getting to the point where people could maybe going to like walking clinics rather than going and having to be detained under the Mental Health Act, which costs so much for one bed for one day, like thousands, right? It's like, you know, what it's they want to save money, but they know that it's going to be like you have to invest into the system first, get these services set up, and then that looks like you're spending lots of money and you're not making it back. But then after a while, you'll make you won't even need the hospitals or as many of them.
So I suppose in that regard, it's the cost over a long period of time, isn't it? I often see in companies that I've worked for, like completely off this, there was a big cost to make a process more efficient, so therefore the overall cost would be much less on the day-to-day, and it would take a year and a half to recoup the entire losses, and then from there it was plain sailing profit. You know, they'd have saved masses and masses, and that's sort of the way you could say that this is going. You know, instead of just loading people up with SSRIs because actually it's the cheapest option on the month-to-month ticket. Over time, over the year, and the fact that people end up having to go back on them and on and off and on and off, rather than actually spending the time trying to find the root cause, finding the therapies that works for them. And it will be different for other people, and there'll be lots of different things to try. And also the person has to want to do the therapy. And I think that's one thing that I think people often forget. Like, as much as someone might be suffering with neuroses or psychosis or anything like that, they still might be afraid to go through the therapy and talk about the things and actually be completely honest. And that in itself, you know, you have to open yourself up and make yourself really vulnerable, and people don't like this either. And and that in itself can prevent you from getting better from the therapy, and you're left in a situation where, well, the medication doesn't work and the therapy doesn't work. Well, you best get some trainers and go out for a run.
And this is the thing. Well, this is the thing about. Sorry, just clocks. This is the thing about the destigmatization of mental illness, because whilst people are denying the fact that they have mental illness, then they're not going to be trying to access therapy. And the physiotherapy thing is an intentional analogy, because physiotherapy requires the individual to do work for the therapy. You don't just go to a physiotherapist, they don't just like do something for you and then you leave, right? You have to do exercises at home, right? And you have to practice things and you have to try stuff out. And that's exactly the same thing for mental illness. You have to do these things. You have to put the work in order to see the benefits. Because if you're just going to your therapist and then just in that like hour period, half an hour period sometimes, you're just kind of like doing it there, you know, how long's the rest of the week or the fortnight, you know? And you're just going to get sucked back into that kind of like whatever feelings you were in. You're not practicing at home. You're not going through the exercises. And they will always give you homework. Every single therapist will give you homework, you know, to practice over the week or fortnight, you know. And it's, you know, it's tough. It's hard work, you know. And that's the thing. I think a lot of people expect to be to go to a therapist, and I've had this myself when I was an assistant psychologist. You know, I've had people come to me and be like, shouldn't you just be fixing this? Like, it's like, I can't do anything. I can provide you with tools, and then you have to implement tools. You know, it's just how it is, unfortunately. And that's why a lot of people prefer the medication route as well, because it's an easy fix.
I suppose you could even say the same thing about I know we're talking about mental fitness, but physical fitness as well. Some people go to the gym and after a session or two go, well, I'm no different. I'm just going to buy diet pills instead.
Yeah.
And it's not actually dealing with the actual problem in the same way that, you know, the medication might not be dealing with the problem that's underneath. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question. I'm gonna try and
Oh yeah, I
read
forgot
the
there was
chat.
my
and
memory is pretty off today. I'm just saying words and forgetting there's questions behind them.
Hey, Azar, nice to see you here. But yes, you want an easy fix. Yes, everybody wants an easy fix. Oh God, I mean, I've the last year and a half or so, I've not been working out anywhere near as hard, and I'd love it if someone could work out for me, and I didn't have to put the effort in. I've got to put even more effort in to get back to where I was before I can continue to progress, and sometimes that can feel daunting. And this is just talking about physical fitness, and mental health is far more complicated, because it's far more different. Everybody's mental state can be so different, whereas bodies are generally pretty similar. There are differences there as well, of course, but they're a lot more similar than different mental illnesses and different mental states and things like that. So just trying to catch up with the chat. So Philip says benzos helped him to get out of a worse period, but he only took them to 2 weeks to avoid addiction. Yeah, I think that's a fair way to do that.
I think I mean, I think benzos, they are useful. They have their uses. Their efficacy, like how effective they are, reduces very quickly, and you need to say double the dose in order to have the same effect eventually. And then they do become addictive. And I've seen so many people addicted to benzos, like as addicted to benzos as people are to heroin, for instance, right? Like committing crime in order to get benzos. Like there was one person who came in who was she literally came in, she got admitted because she knew how to get admitted, stayed for a few nights. She was oh, my camera's going again. She was homeless. So she had like bed and food for a bit, but then she also made sure, like she played the psychiatrist to get benzos, got discharged with her prescription, and then didn't take them because she didn't need them, and sold them to people in her local area who were addicted.
Cheeky.
So yeah, so like people are like, it is like as much of an issue as like illegal drugs, So, and I think people that don't necessarily work in that kind of system don't necessarily see that. So it is a problem.
Yeah. They actually occasionally prescribe me diazepam for my back when it's got a really bad spasm.
Ooh.
Yeah. Everybody says, oh, it feels nice. I don't really feel anything from it. I sort of feel a little bit tired. Oh, we've lost Dave.
What? Dave, no! What did I say? What did I say, Dave? Come back.
But oh, he's back. He's coming back.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Move me to the AFK group.
Oh, really? Is it because you're not talking enough or something?
I guess.
I'm sorry, Dave.
Talk more, Dave. Come on.
Just interested in the conversation, so I'm just listening. Yeah.
Maybe we need to change the settings. I think it's set to 15 minutes of inactivity. Yeah. Never really found anything that works for insomnia, though. Except for moving house.
So so I had insomnia for a little bit, and I'm not medical advice here. I'm not a psychiatrist or a doctor or anything, but there's a over-the-counter medication. It's an antihistamine called promethazine. It's also called Phenergen, and that knocks me out for a few nights. And you can go to the counter and you can say, I need it for some, like, to be able to sleep. Yeah. And they obviously go through the list of like, who's it for, like, and then tell you that actually, you shouldn't be using it for long periods of time. It loses its effectiveness very quickly as well. benzos do. But yeah, basically, yeah. So, but it is, it did work, you know. But it's just that you don't have like a recipe.
What is it about the body that, you know, where we adjust to things so quickly that it does stop them working? And is there anything that we don't adjust to in that regard?
I think that, well, there's like people that have like made poisons, like they've done microdosing of poisons and then up the dose to the point where it's like that would be a lethal dose for anybody else, but they've, you know, managed it to stop it. And I think your body does get used to the things you're putting into it, in order to make sure that you're on an even kiln kind of thing. But that does mean that we have to up medication in order to like balance that out. And that's not just with mental health medication, but that's like with any medication, you know. After a while, they might be like, well, you need to start taking 2 paracetamol instead of 1 because, you know, your body's gotten used to it and stuff. And obviously people that drink a lot, you know, like alcoholics are people that have a lot of drink, you know, they don't tend to appear drunk, you know, because they're, even though they've done like, they might have had like 15 cans or something, and you're like, how have you had 15 cans and you're still standing up? Like, you know, whereas I'd be on the floor like, like vomiting or something, you know. And this is just because I built up tolerance to it. But that's where, like, you know, withdrawal comes in. Like, if you stop that substance very quickly, especially alcohol is the most dangerous one. It's more dangerous to come off of alcohol than it is to come off of heroin. You know, then you're going to put your body into a rough state for a long time. So.
It's crazy, isn't it? The fact that it's completely legal.
Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly, and it's really to go cold turkey on alcohol is like so dangerous. Whereas like heroin, I've seen people. It's not been pleasant to observe, but I've seen people go cold turkey on heroin. They've been fine. They just get shakes and they sweat, and that's it, really. You know, and they feel sick. But somebody with alcohol, their whole body will just shut down.
Crazy. That's really crazy. I didn't realize it was actually quite that bad with alcohol. I knew it was. There have been people that said, "Oh, it's as bad as heroin," but from what you're saying, it's actually
dangerous.
Worse.
Yeah, it's worse. Yeah.
I mean, there are people who it's actually killed, aren't there? I don't know if it's true. I never looked into it, but like, wasn't it Amy Winehouse? She went cold turkey. Or something.
So what happened with Amy Winehouse is that she managed to get off of. She was taking heroin. She managed to get off of it, and then she started back up, but she went back to the dose that she was taking when she'd got off of it. So her body had kind of unadjusted to it, and then she took the higher dose. So initially she would have been taking like a smaller dose, and then she took this bigger dose that killed her. So yeah. And that's another common issue in after people go through rehab is they go back to the dose that they were at when they stopped taking it rather than the dose that they took when they first took it. Because they think that, oh, my body would still be used to this. But like even for me, for drinking, like after the lockdown, I didn't drink for ages properly, and now my tolerance for alcohol is really low. So like embarrassingly low. So yeah.
I suppose that's what pregnant women have to deal with all the time. You know, they have 9 months at least, if not more, without a drink, and then go back on.
My mum drank when she was pregnant with me, and it did me no harm. Honest.
That actually explains a lot. No, I'm just kidding.
It does.
So, are there any more questions out there in the chat? I'm just trying to quickly skim through the everything. So, and Srida says they wouldn't need to commit a crime if they could get a prescription. I mean, you're going into a negative cycle there, really, aren't you? Just go, I'll give you a prescription so you don't commit a crime. I mean, maybe again, it's more on the preventative side that needs to be done. They need to be weaned off.
Yeah,
maybe go through rehab, and therefore they wouldn't be addicted anymore. I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
So they're controlled drugs because they're addictive, right?
Yep.
So I'm I don't think we should be giving people medication for any kind of illness just because they ask for it.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's an asthma inhaler or anything, there needs to be it needs to be a good reason for it. And I think that behavioral reasons aren't necessarily, like addiction isn't necessarily the right reasons. And I agree with you; they should be signposted to the relevant. Like I don't think it should be, if they commit a crime in order to get money, in order to get drugs, they should be put through a rehab program through the court. It shouldn't be just be like, oh well, you did this bad crime, like go to jail. Like they need to be the context of their situation needs to be taken into account.
Yeah, I don't think. I think there's too much emphasis on punishment with the entire prison system.
Absolutely.
Try and help people get better for whatever is causing them. I mean, again, it's going back into the preventative nature to stop people getting back into these negative behaviours again.
And this is the thing with prison, especially, is you take someone who's just committed a crime, you put them into an isolated scenario for however many years that they're in that scenario for, and then when you put them back, they're either in the same situation that you took them from, or they're in a worse situation. Yeah, because they can't get a job now. So what are they going to do? Commit another crime? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
No.
And a lot of criminals call them universities.
Well, yeah, especially the young offenders institutes.
Yeah.
It's where you want to learn how to. Yeah. As a kid, if you do something wrong, like break a bus shelter or whatever, you go to a young offenders institute. You'll come out knowing how to pick locks, how to scam people,
hotwire cars,
how to hotwire a car. Yeah, everything. Yeah.
So you can really learn something.
Mm-hmm.
But as you say,
the education's top notch.
As you say,
and you don't have student loans.
Sounds like we're doing an advertisement for prison right now.
I'll just get my coat.
All I'm saying is that there are worse places to be, right?
Yeah, I suppose that's another place where mental health probably doesn't get dealt with as well within the prison system. I mean, I suppose a lot of people wouldn't even be getting the right medication or the right care in there either, and they're going to be in situations where there's a lot more negative influence as well.
Yeah, I think it's about 50% of the general prison population in the UK have a diagnosed mental illness.
Blimey.
Like it's a massive percentage, and about 50% have less than average intelligence as well.
Is that the same 50% of both, or is it mix and match?
Mix and match.
Right.
Yeah. Because the only criminals that go to prison are the ones that get caught. Right? Yeah, so there's loads of criminals, like, people that are politicians and bankers and all this stuff, and, they cover their tracks really well because they have a little bit more brains.
Yeah.
They understand things a little bit more. They understand the systems and how to get away with it, basically.
When they finally are about to get found out, they get out of the country too.
Yeah, exactly.
So is there anything else that you want to tell us tonight?
So there's one thing that I wanted to talk about. Well, there's a couple more things I wanted to talk about, actually. So the first thing is talking a bit more about that pathologizing everyday behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm sure we all know someone who says, like, oh, I'm feeling a bit depressed today, or, like, oh, I feel anxious about this thing. And they might be accurate statements, but what they think they're saying is that I have anxiety, right? Or I have depression, right? And it's normal. It's normal to feel this way. It's normal to have bad days. It's normal to have good days. It's normal to feel upset if someone rejects you or stuff like this. These are all normal things. And for me, if we start to, as a society, in an effort to destigmatize mental illness, start to go, look at all these things that aren't that show how mentally ill we are when actually they're normal behavior, we're going to go in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of people, like people who have quite acute schizophrenia, people that have acute depression. Some of the people that I've seen and interacted with are in such like difficult situations and like literally like catatonic states, completely detached from reality, cannot leave their bed, cannot leave their home because they're so anxious and stuff. And that's a kind of mental illness that I think we should be aiming to destigmatize, not people feeling a bit rough on one day, and there are people who have like somewhere in the middle, right, who do have anxiety or do have depression, yeah, and those people shouldn't be ignored either. But it's just this everyday stuff, when I see people who are like, like this thing happened to me, and then I didn't want to go out see my mates for a few weeks because I don't know, like, I failed my driving test or something. I just wanted to spend some time alone. That's normal. It's normal to have days where you just want to spend some time alone. But if somebody is like, I am so afraid of what the consequences would be if I stepped outside of my house or if I stepped onto that train or did this or did that, that I can't go see my mates, and this is a regular occurrence, this happens regularly, then they've got anxiety, that needs to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
And they can't be equated. Those two situations can't be equated. And they are.
Yeah, too readily.
Yeah, absolutely,
I suppose it's the same thing that we often talk about, just to do a parody about muddy language. It is muddy language in itself. People are using things, but when we're talking about how really concise terms with very specific meanings should be used, but actually, well, this term sort of means this one, which sort of means that one, so I can use this term for that. It's again, you're ending up in a bit of a messy state. So you've got people, because they're feeling a bit down, thinking they've got depression.
Yeah.
Because a term for it could be they're feeling a bit depressed, but feeling a bit depressed is not the same as suffering with depression. And if they were using clearer terms like, oh, well, I'm feeling a bit down, I don't really want to do anything.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And one that I've seen very, very frequently at the moment is autism. Oh my God. The amount of people that want to have autism at the moment is shocking. There's people that I'm like, why? Like they're like, so for those who don't necessarily understand autism, within autism there's a thing called a triad of impairments, right? So it's to do with communication, it's to do with recognizing emotions, and it's to do with what's that other one? Can't remember, but there's like these three things. Look it up, the triad of impairments. These three things that people with autism struggle with, right? And that's what they look for when they're doing an assessment. Yeah. So there's a thing called theory of mind, which is the awareness that other people have minds. Yeah. And people with autism struggle with that. So they might think that you feel the same way that they do about a certain thing, because they kind of don't understand that you have a different mind to them.
Yeah.
And there are so many people at the moment who are saying like, oh yeah, I sometimes struggle to read someone else's body language, therefore I must be on the autistic spectrum. Or sometimes I don't understand people's jokes. What?
Yeah.
And I've seen so many people do that, and it really frustrates me because I work with people who have autism, like, and it's more than just not understanding people's jokes. Sometimes it severely affects their social interactions. Yeah. and the spectrum, like people say, like the spectrum's so wide that everyone's on the spectrum. Well, then it's a pointless. It's a pointless thing. If everyone's on the spectrum, it's pointless, right? Because it means nothing to say someone's autistic. But if it's a spectrum for a select group of people, like, and then there's a cutoff point where you're no longer on the spectrum, it makes sense to have that as a category, right? It's the same thing as saying babies are atheists, right? It's exactly the same thing. It's the same thing as saying rocks are atheists, because that category is so big that it becomes a name.
Yeah. If everything non-theist is an atheist, then it becomes meaningless.
Yes. So it's just, it frustrates me so much. So not everyone is on the spectrum, okay? That's all I'm saying. Right, I'm going to settle down now. I'm zen again. Yeah.
So, I mean, how wide actually is the spectrum?
Well, I mean, that's a very difficult question to answer. I think for me, if we're talking about autistic spectrum disorder, right? And there's a bit of a question around whether we should be calling it disorder, but for me, I think we should, because I think that the idea of a disorder to me is that it causes disorder in someone's life because they struggle to live in the same way that somebody who we call neurotypical would, right? Because they don't necessarily have the ability to understand why Nando's is different to every other restaurant. You know, like why do I go order at the counter in Nando's, but then everyone else has a table waiting? That doesn't make sense, right? Or they might not understand that sometimes when somebody's being a bit flirty, no means yes. Yeah, because that does happen, you know, in a flirtation. But you can tell from body language that they might verbalize no, but they're being like no, like as a playful thing, right, rather than like an outright no. Yeah, and they might not be able to tell the difference. Yeah, so there's actual disorder, the things that cause disorder in someone's life, right? And it becomes a disorder. Same thing with personality disorder, you know. And I think that that's the point at which we should be starting the autistic spectrum, and then it gets more severe, right? And then the people become completely kind of like they don't communicate verbally. They might not understand kind of anything to do with like social rules at all. They might become quite insular and start to experience that hypersensitivity or hyposensitivity to stimulus. So, you know, that's where it starts for me, is when it starts affecting someone directly, and then you move down the more severe range. And then you get into a point where there's mixed with a learning disability as well.
Would a disorder be regarded as a mental illness in that way?
Technically, yes. I feel like there's certain disorders that we need to think about in a different way. So,
like personality disorders?
I think personality disorders and autism we need to think about differently from mental illness, because they're quite entrenched. Like, you're not going to be able to really medicate somebody who's autistic, right? That's just how they think about the world, right? So what you need to be able to do is help them either understand how the world works and how people think. So give them a social rule book, essentially, that they can kind of learn independently, because they haven't learned it naturally. So they might be like, oh, okay, if Joe nods his head, then he's agreeing with me, right? Because they might not understand that's quite an abstract concept to them, right? Or you can teach the people around them. They might not understand what you're doing, so you need to be quite concrete with your words and stuff, right? So that's how you handle somebody with autism, and help them to kind of function. But you can't give them medication for that. You're not going to be able to give them medication to say, oh, this is how society works, right? So, and then personality disorders, you can medicate with like mood stabilizers and stuff, depending on the personality disorder. But again, it's like it's an entrenched thing. So you give them coping strategies to help them cope with their like emotions or their if they're narcissistic, maybe you help them have a bit more of a realistic expectation about themselves and about other people. So that's how. So it's about kind of guiding people through that rather than thinking of it as a mental illness in my head. Whereas psychosis clearly is like that's a complete detachment from reality. So you need to treat that. That needs to be treated rather than
makes sense.
autism. I don't think it needs to be treated.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So even though they are technically a mental illness, a disorder should be treated in a completely different ballpark.
Yeah, and I think that's where like autism, like kind of like the approach towards autism is going. It's going a less away from like it's moving away from the medical nursing model that we see for other mental illnesses, which is a good thing. But personality disorder, people just don't know what to do with. People have no idea. So I read a book by this guy called Cleckley, who was around in like the 50s, basically 40s and 50s. And when I was reading it, there's like a bunch of cases. It was called Mask of Sanity. I might have mentioned it in the psychopath one that we did. And he has a bunch of case studies, and I was reading them, and I was reading this whilst I was working on the ward, and I was like, nothing's changed. These people still, this is exactly the system that they go through. Nothing has changed for people with personality disorders since the 1940s. It's the same issues, and the systems have not improved at all in order to try and help them because they're so complex and their needs are so high that
it's almost too much.
Yeah, you have to invest a lot of resources, and I don't think a lot of governments or councils or anything are willing to. Rather just let them suffer, basically.
Can personality disorders change? So, like, can people actually genuinely get over at least some of the personality or disorders? So
you can provide them with tools to cope with stuff. So, like, if we take emotionally unstable personality disorder, for instance, so it's usually about attachment. So somebody feels like they're getting rejected. So what they'll do is they'll push boundaries to try and force a rejection so that they're the ones that kind of were in control of that situation rather than waiting to get rejected again, right? And this comes out of a lot of like kind of unstable relationships in somebody's childhood and a lot of loss usually. And what that causes is like a quick fire reaction to like really low level negative stimulus for the fight flight freeze response. So they're suddenly always in fight mode, or they're in flight mode, or they're just stuck, right? Because they're always trying to like push boundaries, and they're trying to, and they react to this stimulus because they're worried that's going to be the next rejection that they're going to get. Yeah, so they have a very low bar for this stimulus, which is why they're so emotionally unstable, because when they get into that state of mind, their emotions are taking over their rational thought processes. Yeah. So what you can do is you can try and give people like a bit of a circuit breaker or something to kind of like ground them. So like you might say like, okay, if you feel this way, if you get into that point where your body's beginning to like, you're starting to get into that anxious phase or like that heightened phase, put your face into cold water, and it kind of breaks that kind of like, it brings you back into your rational thought processes, grounds you. Or you can give them like positive affirmations or stuff like this, you know? So there's ways of helping people cope with them, but there's no way of necessarily changing their personality without like long extended psychological therapy, which, you know, even then it's not guaranteed to work. Like the guys from the 50s, like Cleckley and Freud from even further before, they did a lot of work with people like that, and even they were like struggling to get through like and change anything. So yeah.
So
the most you can do is
basically,
help them cope.
yeah, that's difficult, isn't it? And how many people out there do you think have personality disorders,
A
including
fuck ton.
undiagnosed ones?
A fuck ton.
Everyone.
Especially at the moment, right? You know, like what's happening at the moment. It's like, and I think social media is a big thing to do with this, right? I'm seeing a lot of young people. I feel like an old man saying this, but I see a lot of young people who are like, who are feeling more rejected and feeling like their relationships are more unstable, and are developing personality, like basically emergent personality symptoms because of social media, because they're not getting the likes they want. So they see that as a rejection. Their relationships online are quite fleeting. They might have like quite, they're talking to their friends all the time, right? Which is, you know, like going to cause ruptures and splits, because, you know, if you talk to your friends all the time, they're going to piss you off, right? So you know, there's all this stuff going on at the moment that's you can have more bitchiness that comes out because it's all recorded and stuff, you know, like, so I'm seeing it a lot more in the, like, you know, 18 to 20 kind of age group at the moment. This like emotionally unstable personality, because, and that's why I think it is, because of this extra access to rejection.
Everyone.
Yeah. And dating apps are causing it as well, you know.
Is that what you think the most common issue is at the moment in general?
Personality disorder.
Yeah.
I would say depression and anxiety are still top of the list.
Right. Do you think that lockdowns and everything like that have actually been making it worse?
What the studies show at the moment is that I do think that on an individual, like, most people's mental health has probably had a decline in the past year. But there's not been any significant increase in suicides.
Right.
So I think that people that would have committed suicide would have committed suicide anyway.
Right.
I think the people that did commit suicide would have committed suicide anyway.
Yeah.
Because I don't think. Sorry.
I was just going to say, in like some of the people who were so old and got the vaccination and then died, they generally died around the time that they thought they were going to die as well. So it's, you're saying the same sort of thing with the suicides, that wasn't necessarily
There were
COVID
other
related.
issues.
Yeah.
And like, let's be fair, right? If somebody was on the brink of feeling like they were going to commit suicide, do you think they would have stuck to, like, sorry, if somebody who wasn't like kind of already in that space prior to lockdown and didn't feel isolated and stuff, felt isolated because of the lockdown, and then was like having those thoughts, and then do you think that they'd stick to the lockdown rules?
No.
No, so that's the reason I think there's not been an increase, because those individuals that got to that point where they're like, you know what, I cannot bear this anymore, broke the rules, right? And they went and saw their family because they were like, you know, I just can't cope anymore. You know, and the people that were already in that space and kind of like, you know, the suicide's not simple. It's not just like people being isolated on their own. It's low self-esteem, it's money issues, it's relationship issues. Like, that, to get to that point, it takes a lot. And I think that, you know, those people would have had issues from the previous year, definitely. You know, there's no way that some people, maybe it would have happened, but yeah, absolutely. You know, it's more complex than just being like, oh, people are home alone for a year. No.
Do you think it's the whole lockdown thing has actually highlighted to some people that they actually feel better within a lockdown environment, seeing people less, being able to work from home, and actually they benefit from this, whereas people who like to be out there and all hustle and bustle and around loads of people, they're suddenly starting to feel maybe what other people actually felt like when they're forced to be in their situations, which was the way the world was working.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I think that it's a very personal thing, isn't it? Like, I think if I was alone, if I didn't live with my partner, then I would have had maybe a bit more problem with it. But I was staying with her, so it was fine. Like, we did we did puzzles and stuff. Like, I played lots of video games. Like, if anything, I spoke to my friends way more than I had ever spoken to them. Like I was playing like Warzone with them like daily at one point, and I hadn't spoken to them daily since school. Like, so for me, it actually made me reconnect with my friends a little bit more. Whereas before it was like kind of like, oh, I might see them once a month or something. So I think it had technology. I think if that happened in a different time period, it would have been a lot more tough. But we have the technology to be able to manage it, and I think that maybe I wouldn't have even come onto YouTube or whatever had that happened. Like, there's lots of things I think people have started to do as a result of lockdown that they wanted to do before, but didn't have the time or space because they were always going out socializing. I know loads of people that have stopped binge drinking regularly and are actually like, wow, there's other things other than drinking alcohol on the weekends. I can go for a walk in the park. I can read books. Like, there's loads of people that have had that experience as well, which is great, because they were literally just spending all their money on alcohol every Friday or Saturday night, and drugs, and they haven't done drugs in over a year. It's great. So, yeah, it's had positive and negative effects, but I think that.
And everybody's experience will be different. I mean, there will be some people out there who really, really did struggle with lockdown for various reasons, and I think that this isn't to diminish their experience in the slightest. It was more to raise the point that actually we are all different, and for some people, it actually made their life a little bit easier, a little bit better in certain ways. It might have also had some negatives in other ways, and life is about balance. But I think there are, because of the way the world tends to work, it tends to work for the people who like to be out there, and doesn't really tend to work for the people that are a bit more reserved. And I think that is one of the things that's actually quite troubling. It's quite illuminating, all the people who have majorly been struggling with the lockdowns, at least that I'm aware of, have been those that would have been described as extroverts. Suddenly they're in a situation where they can't be there, and they can't be loud and proud and being out there and being the center of attention, and they only have themselves and their partner, and
usually those people have the lowest self-esteem, right? They need to get their self-esteem from others, right? So when they're put into a situation where they're just on their own, it becomes problematic for them, because they're no longer they're like, well, I'm not getting validation right now, right? So extroversion is one of those really interesting things, because the most extroverted people tend to be the ones that have the most unstable sense of self. Because they need to seek validation. They need to get people. They need to say jokes. They need to impress people in order to get their sense of self, validated, right?
Yeah.
So, which is interesting, and I'm imagining being cut off from that would be stressful, right?
Yeah.
The thing I'm most interested in is seeing how the children who are like 4 or 5 years old during this lockdown will cope in when they're like teenagers and stuff, because their social skills are very important, like around the 4 or 5 age group, and like mingling with other children is quite important. So like I have a nephew who's like 2, almost 3. I don't think it's necessarily going to affect him too much, but it might do. So I think there's going to be a lot of work for psychologists coming up in the next 10 years to see how this lockdown has affected, those children.
Hopefully, it won't too much. I do worry about the school systems as well, though. The education, so much of it has, because things aren't set up properly and weren't set up properly, and things have been done too slow. Different bits of home education have been done differently. When the schools finally did get them doing work, it was very inconsistent, and it was, kids obviously didn't feel in the same way that they have to focus, and there are kids who haven't done exams. I feel like everything with the education wise, people are going to be further behind, but you can't necessarily say, well, no, you need to do an extra year of school because COVID. So there are kids that are either not going to be able to go to things like university or their sixth forms because they're required to go to sixth. But won't necessarily be able to get into university because they've missed a big chunk of their education, and their option is they will have to do an additional year to make up, or they'll have to get a job, and then we're going to have a generation where there are less educated people out there. And I don't even know how that would necessarily affect the university system as well. Do they have to do longer courses with the whole? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, there's so many little factors and things jumping around in my brain right now.
Yeah, I think that it's. Sorry, I'm just trying to organize my thoughts.
Yeah,
I do think I see your point. I'm not sure if it's going to be as problematic as some people are making out, and the reason I think that is because if we think about the school system prior to university, right, it's entirely designed to help people pass exams. The information is secondary, so you're almost not teaching kids how to the information that they need anyway. You're teaching them this is what you need to know to pass an exam. Same with GCSEs, same with A levels, right?
Yeah.
It's when you get to university that you kind of have to employ more critical thinking skills, right? So
you actually have to understand it.
Yeah, you have to understand and critique the information that you're getting. And I think that it might be that's where we see the problem is those early university things, because but it's a different skill set anyway. I wasn't ready for it when I went to uni. I was like, I'm just going to do everything, pass exams and stuff. And then I got my first essay back and I was like, oh, okay. They basically said, you're not just meant to agree with me. Think about this, And that's that's, I guess, I think we'll be okay, basically. I don't know if Dave, do you agree with me?
Yeah, because the first year of uni is mostly just teaching you all the skills you're going to need to get through your second and third year. And that's why your grades don't... Your face froze on the most awesome porn face then on the stream.
He's had a few good ones this stream, actually. Yeah. It's been amazing. Yeah,
my face freezing.
Yeah, occasionally it just completely freezes it. Beautiful faces.
I'm going to snap it and make it a profile picture.
No.
But yeah, that's why your first year doesn't really count. It's only your second and third year that really count towards your grade. So I think the difference is such coming from regular school to uni that it's not going to affect it too badly, except maybe a few grounding ideas.
Yeah.
Oh, hopefully, much in the same way as hopefully, the issues aren't going to affect the young'uns too much either.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
So Ansrita says, I had 3 lockdowns where I was not allowed to leave the flat, and it did no good at all for my physical health. That required me to shield, but I didn't get COVID, and you had your PC and radio. So, I mean, yeah, at least, as you said earlier, at least we've got the technology to help ourselves keep contacted. And I'm with you on the physical health side of things. I found it a lot harder getting the motivation to exercise in the way that I was before, because you were doing less things, and you were trying to be really sensible. And I know that you could go out to do some of the exercise but it's just a bit like, So yeah, no, I feel you there. Hopefully you actually had some form of company for you there, though. I don't know your situation, but you're still here, so that's good. Right, do you have anything else that you wanted us to cover off?
Yes.
Oh, did you?
So, yeah.
All these tangents.
So having covered everything, let's go back to the question of the stream, right? Which is mental illness? What is it? Is mental illness real? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it real? What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what if I was to tell you that there's... Sorry?
I was going to say, I have to admit, I thought that before the stream started, so...
Right, so your views haven't changed. That's good. So what if I was to tell you that there is a group of people that are trying to get rid of the medical model of mental illness in place of basically the idea that people that are experiencing mental illness are just perceiving the world in a different, unique way, and that we should be more accepting of their approach to the world. And we shouldn't try to medicate it or treat it because it's perfectly acceptable.
I would say if it negatively impacts their life, then they do need some help.
Yeah.
What if it negatively impacts their life because of society's stigma towards it? That's their argument.
That's why I would think more research would need to be done. Like if the treatments, it's kind of sounds like Nietzsche's ideas of morality, where certain people should be allowed to drink all day if it's going to affect their creativity and make them better artists. They just have a different kind of moral lifestyle. But I'm not really sure that would be the case with all forms of mental illness. Like if you're in a psychotic state or you're in psychosis, then you're not just seeing the world in a different way. You're seeing it in a world that affects your seeing it in a way that affects your day-to-day life in a negative way, and makes it harder for you to kind of live.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of something.
Yeah, at least that's my opinion.
No, I'd agree with you there, and I'm trying to think of something that, if we were to take away society's view and we were to say that it actually doesn't have any negative impact other than that, what is there? I can't think. I can't think of anything.
Can you ask that question again? Sorry, I got distracted by something.
What?
No, don't worry.
Did Katie walk past naked again?
No. No, ask that question again.
Is there a mental illness that actually has no negative effects other than society's view on it?
Well, I think that's the question, isn't it? So, if there is actually a really good example of how society's view on a mental illness can affect the experience of mental illness. So, if we think about like Caribbean cultures, for instance, they have a lot of psychosis in Caribbean cultures. So, in like Jamaica, Barbados, etc., right? And they used to think of it in a way of like it's a connection to the spirits. Yeah, so people were hearing voices of spirits and angels and stuff like that, and it was a positive experience, right? And those people were regarded as like connected to the spirit world.
Mm-hmm.
And now in the UK, we have if you hear voices, it's taboo. It's not very good, right? You shouldn't hear voices. That's something wrong with you, right? People have negative experiences, so they hear a lot more command hallucinations telling them to do bad things. They hear a lot more like self-deprecating hallucinations. they see a lot more horrible stuff rather than positive stuff. So in a society where the psychosis is accepted, they have positive psychotic experiences. And in a society where it's rejected, they have negative psychotic experiences. So in that in that society that accepts it, is there anything wrong with being psychotic?
Are they prone to do dangerous things because the voices tell them, well, actually, no, we need to eat this baby? The voices told me. And everybody goes, oh, well, yes, the voices told you and you're connected to the spirit world. The spirits know, therefore we shall eat this baby.
Well, I guess that's the thing. So at that point, it would become more like a moral issue, wouldn't it?
Yes.
But if that person was so my view of it, if you want to hear my view,
of course, that's why you're here.
Is it? I thought I was here to bullshit you guys for 2 hours. My view of it is that I totally understand it. Like, I think that medication and treatment should only be applied to individuals where their mental illness affects their ability to cope and puts them in danger or puts others in danger. So there was a woman, for instance, who heard angels speaking. She was working on the. She wasn't working on the ward. She was admitted to the wards because her psychosis had deteriorated. Basically, she had hit angels, and she came onto our ward, and within 2 days, she was hearing demons instead. She was like, I don't like this place. There's only demons speaking to me. The angels speak to me outside of here when I'm at home and stuff. The psychiatrist decided to discharge her without any extra medication or anything pretty much straight away because of the effect that the ward environment was having on her. It was making her more distracted.
It was actually causing more harm.
Yeah, exactly. So her ability to cross roads, for instance, was completely thing because she was hearing these negative voices. She was more distracted, so she could have got hit by a car. So the psychiatrist just went, I'm just going to discharge you and just stay in touch with our community team to make sure that you're still doing okay. You're managing to get your food shops and stuff like that and cope within the society. So for me, it's about that kind of like, I'm not too bothered if somebody's hearing voices or not. If they're unable to look after themselves or they're a danger to other people, then that's when we need to think about treating it. If they're just having a pleasant psychotic experience and they can still cross roads and they can still get their food and they can still pay their bills and all that stuff, let them have their fun psychotic experience,
Is there a chance, though, that someone in that state is more dangerous?
So purely someone having a mental illness makes them less likely to commit any kind of crime, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah. So most people with mental illnesses are more likely to be the victims of crime.
Right.
Somebody who has a mental illness who has committed crime is more likely to commit more crime if they have a mental illness.
Right.
So it's like this weird kind of thing, right? It's either the extreme, like not committing crime. Most people with mental illnesses don't commit crimes, but the ones that do commit more crime than the general criminal population.
Yeah, fair. And with mental illnesses that or those that are mentally ill that commit crime, is it more violent crime or is it a different kind of crime that's usually done?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure about that. I would say they are probably more impulsive crimes, yeah, rather than planned. So yeah. I will look into that.
Yeah,
I'll come back to you.
Interested. Yeah, definitely interested. Whether it's for a future stream or just when we take off air.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the kind of crimes that, because if you think about the prison population, right? I said earlier that like about half of them have a diagnosed mental health condition. Mm-hmm. A lot of those people have psychosis, so some sort of psychosis, and a lot of them have depression and anxiety, self-esteem issues, right? And I think that if you're in those situations, like especially with anxiety and psychosis, the reason that you're in prison is because you got caught because it was an impulsive act based on like either you were being told to do something by a voice, or you thought somebody was like an MI5 agent and you called them out and then got into a fight with them or something, like, you know, these kind of things, or you had to fight for like freeze response and just reacted to someone and then like beat them up because you thought they were gonna hurt you in some way or something. So I think those are the kind of crimes that people tend to respond to, like if they have a mental illness. It tends to be kind of like these kind of things, more passionate, more impulsive crimes than like shoplifting or embezzlement or stuff like that, you know.
Yeah, no, that makes
so.
Yes,
I guess it would be. Yeah, I guess it would be more violent, but
yeah, not necessarily violent, but a higher chance of it being a violent crime of sorts.
Yeah.
Fair. So, a couple of comments. And Srida says, I think some ancient shamans were schizophrenic, but that's no reason not to treat genuine illness. I saw a documentary on a shaman being ostracized because she did sacrifices at the wrong time. That's interesting in itself. But if we focus on that genuine illness, that's sort of the point I was making earlier. You know, even this person, like for example, this person you were talking about who listened to the angels. It seems to me like there's any point that could switch to the demons. Okay, so it was that negative environment there that was doing it to her. But surely we should still treat someone who might be having a positive experience to try and stop the experience altogether, to try and prevent the potential. Because it's not just something like, for example, we'll call back to the beginning part of the stream where we were talking about how some people see religion as a mental not. And realistically, I think that we should just let people have their beliefs, even if we perceive them as irrational, as long as they're not hurting anyone. The second that they are doing, you know, they're believing something, that they fall into a pattern where they have seriously harmful beliefs, we should actually try and do our best to change those. I'm sort of, if we're talking along the mental illness front, because it is something that could so easily switch into a harmful behavior, it's not just like having a belief system and then suddenly deciding to do something like, a violent outburst, for example, that could happen because, you know, you might be having a positive psychotic experience, but then all of a sudden it switches and you're attacking everyone around you. So, whereas with a belief, it would be a long change, I imagine, over a lot of time to get to the point where they felt that they had to be in a frenzy and attack.
I think that so the average person with a mental illness is not going to be violent in any way.
Oh, we've lost your mic there, Luke. Yeah.
Am I back?
Oh, I'm back.
You're back.
What's going on? We're at the end.
What's going on?
So the average person who's mentally ill will not be violent. It will just be them. You know, they'll be more vulnerable themselves, actually. You know, and I think that it is interesting. There are some people, I think, that switch would happen. I think bipolar would be a really good example where it's better to treat bipolar than to allow people to have the high of being manic, because the high of being manic feels really good, but they spend all their money, they have sex with complete strangers, they eat food that they normally wouldn't eat. I've met people who are adamantly vegan because because of the moral issue of eating meat, and then they ate loads of meat when they're in a manic phase and they felt really guilty about it when they came back down. So I think there's certain things that we need to take into consideration. It's a bit more complex than just like kind of like maybe that one woman with the angels and stuff, right? But I do also think that the stigmatization of mental illness, specifically schizophrenia, psychosis, etc., causes people to have more negative experiences, and therefore makes their experience of psychosis worse, which makes their like presentation when they were having a psychotic experience worse. So a part of a treatment actually would be destigmatizing it.
Yeah.
Because people can cope easier. Like if you're walking down the street and someone's just saying nice things to you all the time, that's a lot like easier to cope with than somebody just chatting shit at you for like all hours of the day, right?
Yeah.
You know, like me being here, like if someone's saying, "Oh yeah, you're doing really well, all the points you're making are really good, really valid, you're smashing it," like I'll be like, "Yeah, okay, I'll just carry on," right? But if there's someone going, "You're shit," constantly, I'd just be like, "I can't do this," right? So it's about kind of like, well, what's the I think it is what you're saying. We need to identify it still, but whether it needs treatment, I think, is the key.
No, I agree with you. Sorry, your face just froze again.
What? No! I saw you put a face. I was like, something's happened. Damn it.
We've got lots of porn covers ready.
So
turn my camera off.
Don't worry, we'll blur the eyes.
So a couple of comments in the chat. Oz says, religion perpetuates mental health issues by ignoring them and tells the person to pray more and have faith that God will heal you. They don't point people to professionals and medicine. I mean, that can happen. I mean, things like faith healing and stuff like that are notoriously dangerous. But I don't think that really describes any or even most religions at all. I think you're talking about an extremist point of view. Obviously, I don't have statistics on that, but every religious person that I know still goes to the doctor, and their religious leaders would do the same. And I went to very religious schools myself, and had to say the Lord's Prayer and do Sunday services at them and all of that. And we had a medical problem, we were sent to the doctor. So I don't think that is you shouldn't make it a blanket term that religion perpetuates these mental health issues in that way. It can do by some people. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's true. I think something that might make it seem like that happens more is the amount of, and the idea that religion is mental illness, is the amount of people who maybe are psychotic who have either religious experiences or claim that they're like Jesus, or that they're in contact with Jesus, or they've heard God or something like that. And that is just down to them responding to stimulus that's in the world. If we had a different word or a different kind of concept, they would be using that concept. It's about kind of grandiosity. It's about feeling important. It's about like a supernatural thing, explaining that feeling that they're having through that means, and using the language that we have in the world. It's not necessarily about actually being Jesus. It's about kind of like, who's the most important person in the world? Jesus, therefore I'm Jesus. And it's that delusion that they have, right?
Yeah, fair. I suppose online interactions and that can also inform this. If we think about how, well, with every group, you always hear the worst, don't you? Any group that's not yours anyway, you hear the worst stories about them. I often bring it back to how when you hear about vegans, you hear about the holier than thou kind, the ones that throw pig blood over people eating meat and things like that. And actually, that's the smallest percentage of actual vegans, but they're the ones that are getting in the news. And it's the same thing with religion. You always hear about the people who, instead of getting cancer treatment for their child, just prayed for it, and things along those lines. And you always hear the absolute worst. And that's what the news is, really. News is the bad news, the worst news. It's never actually a rounded picture, because I guess people aren't interested in that. People are interested in the drama and negativity and being able to look down on people and call them stupid, and therefore all of this negative information is presented to us, and we as atheists often see just the negative side of theism and religion, and actually there's a hell of a lot of positives to it too, and we don't want to acknowledge those, and we can be very guilty of wiping that under the table, or saying that it was done, all the positives come from some form of atheism or non-theism or humanism or anything like that, and it has nothing to do with religion. We demonize religion in the way that mental illness is stigmatized, and then we conflate the two as well. And it's a bit of a negative tangled web.
Yeah, and just to plug my channel a little bit, if you want to see some kind of average believers talk about their belief and stuff, then I have a few conversations on my channel that them asking me questions and me asking them questions, and it's you can see that the kind of more average person rather than the kind of more fundamentalist online people.
True. On your channel, you do some Ask an Atheist and Ask a Theist, and it's you and you've got I think you've got a creationist friend, a general theist, and a deist that you usually speak to, don't you?
Yeah.
I'm going to load up your channel and put a link to it in the chat. Nice. So, just tell us a little bit more about your channel whilst I'm typing.
Oh well, so I guess I started out by writing a book, or starting to write a book, which I'm currently doing, and then realised that I need an audience for that if it's going to get anywhere. So I was like, I need to start a YouTube channel as well. And the idea is that basically I'm taking things down to grassroots, because I think there's a big gap in online atheist rhetoric about how do we cope with things as atheists. There's a lot of stuff around, countering religion, and there's a lot of stuff around essentially anti-theist stuff, which is fine, but there's not enough, not in my opinion, not enough stuff around basically what you guys were chatting about in your stream last week about, how do we cope with things? How do we replace the morality aspect? How do we get out of this whole nihilistic thinking, and give ourselves purpose and stuff like that? And so that's kind of what I want to help people develop a little bit and give people some ideas around where they can access information around that, which is I've got some book reviews, discussions with my dearest friends, and then some drama. Which is, the drama videos have done the best, obviously. So
of course they do. Yeah, it's the same with any blog articles you write. If you put a clickbait title in, you'll get so many more. Well,
this one's going to get a lot. People are going to be like, "Of course, mental health's real."
Yeah, and do you know what? Most people won't have even taken the time to watch it and to find out any of the content. They'll be responding angrily. We've done a few articles along those lines, and you get people instantly responding, and it's like, actually what you're saying was said in the first line of the article, so if you'd actually taken the time to read it. But then I guess that's us to a T, isn't it? We're all very hot-headed reactionary creatures ourselves. So to come on to a few more comments. Cafe says, "Hey Cafe, by the way, Terence McKenna explained that in shamanistic societies the schizophrenic is revered. It's told they'll lead the tribe, that they're special and will become great masters. And contrast that to what schizophrenics are told in our society: you can't hold a job, you're sick, you need help, you're lower than worth than the rest of us. Now that's what Luke was saying earlier about there are some people who with certain mental illnesses or disorders that could actually be having a genuine positive experience if it wasn't for the stigma in society. And there are others, obviously, that are just harmful through and through, and they need the help. I'm with you. I think that maybe there is something that needs to be done about the stigmatism for the mentally ill. And it's all well and good, any of us saying here, well, we don't have that stigma. That doesn't really help the larger part of society. And it is still viewed as a negative thing. And it still doesn't help that, as you mentioned really early on in the stream when you were talking about psycho killers and stuff like that, you know, the way it's dramatized in all of the media that we see on a regular basis, we're given such faulty information. We actually did a stream, it was with you, on psychopathy, didn't we? So
yes, it was a good stream.
It was really enjoyable, and Kristen was in that one as well. So I mean, I'd suggest watching that one if you're interested in psychopathy from an actual psychological perspective, not the media bullshit that you get presented on a daily basis.
I would also argue that I'm willing to bet that all three of us here are still stigmatized towards mental health.
I'd say that there is still a stigma towards it, because when you actually think about it, you think about the negatives straight away. That's what comes up in your mind.
Like, if you were having a day where you were feeling like particularly mentally strained or something like that, maybe you were feeling depressed, and you had to call in sick to work, would you rather call in sick to work and be honest about it, or would you rather call in sick to work and say you have diarrhea and vomiting or etc.?
Being honest about it doesn't get you anywhere, because if you are honest about it,
they're stigmatized. Because they're stigmatizing it.
It's true. They stigmatize it. You talk about them, you try and tell them what's going on, and they say, "Oh, you've got nothing wrong with you. Just get yourself in."
That's true.
So, and then you end up having to lie. You learn that lying is the only way to get out of it. Because you can't do it, you have to make up some illness because of the stigma, and then that stigma sticks with you.
And that's how it keeps going, right?
Yeah. So I think there's still going to be some stigma, but I think that there's the willingness to try and undo it is at least a step in the right direction. I don't know how much of a big step it is, but it's something. So I mean, Oz is saying that in America it's the norm. So talking about the stigmatized within his particular church, that I guess. So he was told it within Christianity until about 4 years ago. He had 36 years of no therapy, no meds, nothing. You should just trust God. I mean, I'm really sorry for your experience. Maybe it is the norm in America. I can't necessarily say that, but what denomination were you? That could play a big part of it. And whereabouts in America did you live? Because again, your locale in America can really, really affect that sort of thing. I lived in Michigan for a little while, and whilst there were some people who were very, very strict on their religion, medical problems were always dealt with medically. So I didn't actually have that experience when I lived in America, although I did have a friend that was beaten because they said that they didn't want to get confirmed. So it's not all good.
I think with America as well, you've got the issue of insurance healthcare, right? So if you have a particularly poor area and people don't have insurance and they don't have access to psychological therapies, how are they going to manage that?
Yeah, they don't have universal healthcare like they do somewhere over here. So
so like, to me it's like, well, Christianity is almost like it's not an effective way of coping with that stuff, but it's a way of coping. And for people who become atheists, it's really tough because it's like, it's the same thing that, you guys spoke about in your stream last week, and I keep banging on about. It's like, you need stuff to replace this too, because religion is really good when you believe it, right? Coping with death, the community, all of that stuff, it works really well. And then when we become atheists or whatever, it all just falls apart because there's not the infrastructure in place. And that's a really key example about, trusting in God. People will have better psychological experiences because they feel comforted by the fact that God is there. And us not having that comfort will affect us. Yeah, so maybe it works for them. And I'm not excusing their behavior at all, Oz, just so you know, but just thinking in a place where there's not access to effective therapies because of the cost of them or something like that, that it's the only other option for a community of people.
There's a comment that's just come in as well, which it's not about this stream. So I was just going to type a response, but you finished talking as I was typing.
Oh.
So Cafe says you can't even have a moral conundrum without an objective moral framework, and you can't have an objective moral framework without God. Moral arguments coming from atheists put the cart before the horse. Well, I'd have to disagree with you. You can have objective moral frameworks without God. And even if you can't have an objective moral framework, you can still have a moral conundrum. It just doesn't mean as much. But you can have objective moral frameworks without God's, and we do. And if you're really interested, there's a few videos that we've done on this. There's morality and misconceptions, and feedback on morality and misconceptions. There's the psychopathy and morality. There's moral particularism and value pluralism. And also there is a post on Answers in Reason, which is called "Does Morality Have a Purpose?" And it examines a load of different objective moral frameworks to locate a purpose of morality and common themes within moral systems that would be essentially the goal, which we could then draw objective statements from. So in that regard, I'm afraid I'm just going to have to disagree with you. But I do agree with your next statement. The new atheists are the most fundamentalist form of atheists. And by that, you're not talking about necessarily the new atheism in general. You're talking about the online internet atheists. But again, that's not what we're talking about on this stream. So I'm going to get back on topic.
When have you guys ever stayed on topic?
We have topics.
Hey, where's mine? I could do with a new chocolate bar right now.
Ooh.
Although, to be fair, I don't like topics. They've got raisins in, don't they?
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of raisins. Love fruit. Not a fan of dry fruit.
I don't know why that broke me, but it did. I think it was the strength with which you said it.
The conviction.
Yeah, the conviction, that was it.
Oz says medical treatment for the physical body was completely accepted and endorsed, but mental health issues and or diagnoses were viewed as an attack of the devils or a sign of weakness. I grew up in the evangelical church and eventually navigated to a more progressive doctrine. So I think that is a case that you do see with a lot of evangelical Christians and fundamentalist theists in general. What the hell was that? That was my cat. That really scared me. She doesn't make that noise unless she's getting lost, which is right there. So yes, I do understand, and I do empathise with you there, and I'm sorry that you actually had to go through that. And you do tend to have a lot more evangelical and fundamentalist churches in the United States. So and unfortunately, I mean, like Luke was saying earlier, blimey, she's mental tonight. Like Luke was saying earlier, the other issue you do have in America is all the insurance issues. You don't have universal health care, and there isn't this general encouragement and to do those things. I must admit, even the school system out there was very, very different, and there are a lot of topics that you were further behind in the sort of education system that I was in beforehand. So again, you wouldn't have necessarily had anything like that through your schools telling you on how mental illness and we don't necessarily have much on mental illness in our schools here, but we do have things where we're made aware of it, and so yeah, you're right. Healthcare is a whole other important topic, and one that will probably go way too off piste and take way too long, and just end up. It has to be a stream of itself, really. I'd love to have a proper chat about universal healthcare in the future, especially if we can get someone who's really against it and can lay out why they are. Because as far as I can tell, it's got its flaws, but it's definitely better than not having it. It just needs more funding rather than it being cut. But that's a UK issue.
There is a comment that I would like to hear your response to, Joe. I don't know if you've seen it yet. So it's Cafe, I think, responding to what we were just talking about with the objective morality, saying, I'll check them out, but I'm in agreement with Jordan Peterson that atheists have to borrow from theism to ground morality.
Yeah, I think I've seen that Jordan Peterson one that you're talking about. He was talking about
I actually
Sam
have an article
Harris.
about that.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, because he talks to various people. He talks with Sam Harris about it. He talks with Ben Shapiro about it. He talks with loads of people about it. But yeah, I wrote an article on it because of the fact that a lot of our morality isn't grounded on any theistic concepts, really.
I'd agree. But theistic morality is basically following God's rules. So I don't know how it borrows from theistic morality. I'll check out your article, though. I will like to get into it. A topic with raisins. Don't you mean a picnic? My topics only have hazelnut and nougat. Maybe I am getting confused.
I'm going to Google this quickly.
Maybe it's the picnics that I don't like and topics that I do. I'm getting really hungry now. I think I might have to end the stream and go and eat something.
Oh yeah, topics only have hazelnut. Wait, there's one. There's one that's just come up called Minge. I don't know if you're gonna be able to see it because it's.
No, it's not coming up really.
No.
Oh yes, there is Minge.
Oh yeah, I can see it now.
Oh, it's gone. Hang on. Oh, you frozen?
It's frozen perfectly.
Brilliant. That's your new profile pic.
Minge.
Wow, that's made my night.
But yeah, cool. Was there anything else you wanted to cover before we go tonight?
I think I've covered everything.
I think you have covered everything and then some. Because we covered topics and picnics. Awesome. Right. Well, we'll take some of these comments and maybe do another stream. Cafe, if you read those articles and you have any feedback, that'd be great. I'd be happy to address them in a future stream as well, if you'd like. I do enjoy conversations about morality, and it's been probably a couple of months before since we've actually had a conversation on morality. So and I do enjoy them so much. And Frida's going to try and get hold of some minge. Brilliant. Well, I do apologise for my confusion between topics and picnics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like your definitions of words don't matter.
This is why we should be using clear and concise terms. If we use every chocolate bar just being a topic, then, how do we know what chocolate bar we're talking about at all?
Babies are topics.
Brilliant.
I do have one important question for Luke, though.
Oh, yeah?
Is that Eric Van Lustbader's The Ninja behind you?
Where? Oh, no.
Oh.
How to be a productivity ninja.
Oh, right, okay. Never mind.
It's a book I got from work.
Okay.
Trying to tell me something, I think.
I just saw Ninja pop up, and I thought, oh, is that Eric Van Lustbader? No. Sorry, I get very nosy when I see books. I wonder why,
Yeah, eventually I'll have my study and I'll have all my books in there, and you'll see that pretty much every single one of my books was written by Terry Pratchett or David Eddings.
It's not a bad thing.
No.
Yeah, I still can't wait for The Office to be done. I haven't even started work on it out there yet. So much to do. But eventually, a proper man cave.
Ooh.
Yeah. Right.
Yes.
And I'm an apicanist. Cool. I am going to say good night to everybody. Thank you very much for coming. And Luke, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been really enjoyable conversation.
Yeah, nice one. I learned a lot.
Yeah, and so did I. I'm probably going to have to rewatch the stream to remember it all.
And to find some of the freeze frames.
Oh, God, yeah.
Oh, no.
Well, I'm also going through converting all the new streams into audio podcasts as well. So it'll give me an opportunity to at least re-listen to this.
I'll listen to it then. Yeah.
Awesome. And thank you everybody who's been joining in, especially in the chat, and everybody that's watching this on the rerun. You've been listening to the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
He's Luke.
And he's Dave.
Good night all.
Good night all.
Bye.
Chocolate.